Hey up, it's Trev here, back again for another episode of Films I Own that I haven't watched yet. This week's film is another one from the archives. Now, I'd just like to give a little bit of explanation of what type of film this is. Now, listen, I've got in my DVD collection, yes, I have normal DVD cases, but I also have hundreds of sort of paper CD cased sized films. You know, these are ones that you usually get free with newspapers. I've got well over 100. These are the films that I probably would never have chosen to watch, so these are quite interesting to me. And the film that gets picked out today is one of those films. Now, these are often older movies, classics, more art house movies, foreign films, and they are films that are sort of going to enhance and expand my viewing criteria, really. So, yeah, not the sort of films I would have chose. So, and this week, one of those films will get chosen out, which is Brighton Rock, starring Richard Attenborough, a very young Richard Attenborough. So, anyway, without further ado, let's go over to the original episode and listen to episode 2 of the films that I own that I haven't watched yet. What up, G's? It's Trevor here. It's time for another episode of the films that I own that I have not yet watched. You might have seen episode 1 last week where I watched and reviewed First Man, starring Ryan Gosling. Well, this week, what will it be? So, here's my pot of titles. Over 100 titles in here. Have a rummage. Got one. Right, it's an old one. Brighton Rock. Now, that's one of these. Somewhere in here, this collection here, these are ones that you used to get free in newspapers. There it is. Brighton Rock, directed by John Boultin, starring Richard Attenborough, Hermione Baddeley and William Hartnell. Brighton Rock, adapted from Graham Greene's classic novel, offered Richard Attenborough one of his best early roles. Pinky Brown is the juvenile leader of a seedy gang who run a protection racket based at Brighton Racecourse. After he orders the murder of a rival, it seems naive young waitress Rose may know too much, so Pinky decides to keep her quiet by marrying her. But it was never going to be so easy. Yeah, not seen this one. An old British film, 1947. So yeah, let's have a look at Brighton Rock and I'll give you my review afterwards. Okay, so just watched Brighton Rock, set in Brighton in between the First and the Second World War, and gangs all sort of fighting for control of Brighton. It's based on a Graham Greene book. Graham Greene, I've heard of him, and I was thinking I don't know where I've heard of him from. Googled him, and the only thing I recognised was he wrote The Third Man. Was that Orson Welles? It's meant to be a cult classic, must admit it's one I haven't watched. My older brother, it's one of his favourite films. Anyway, Brighton Rock is quite a gritty story. There's some moody cinematography. You know, it's an old British film, but there's a bit of a gap. You know, watching it now, it does seem to come off very dated. I think when the film first started, the very first shot was a shot of Dickie Attenborough's face, and it was very dark and moody, and I thought, oh, I think I'm going to like this. Then that starts off to be a montage of all the characters you're going to see, and it's a very cheesy montage. This is the opening credits are rolling. The music was sort of really ill-fitting and just bizarre, which it was a lot through the film, to be honest. The music never really fit the film. It was a bit of an awful soundtrack. They kill this guy at the beginning, trying to create an alibi, and one of them gets spotted trying to fix the alibi by this young waitress. So Dickie Attenborough wants to sort of protect himself, so he's sort of keeping her close, and then he marries her so that she can't testify against her own husband, or something to that effect. Dickie Attenborough plays it a bit sort of cool, really over the top in the very first scene. It's just like in Jurassic Park, actually, when he's over the top with his Scottish accent in the first scene, and then no Scottish accent for the rest of the film. But yeah, he's a bit over the top in the first scene, then he's playing it very sort of dark and moody, solemn. But sort of everyone else around him is very sort of... It's like watching Mr. Chumley Warner, the old Harry Enfield sketches. If you don't know that, Google it and you'll get an idea of what this is like. So he's trying to convince this girl anyway. He gets her on his side. That's the part I can't get my head into that. I can't see why she would fall for him when he comes off threatening straight away. He sort of almost threatens her by saying, oh, you know, some other girl spoke out, and then she ended up with her face smashed in. You know, it's quite dark, it's quite serious, and I imagine the book probably works better than the film. The film was a bit patchy. A lot of the action scenes, they was brave with the editing. Sometimes it worked, sometimes there was some good shots, really interesting shots, and canted low angles, which I thought was quite interesting. It's all brave for the time it's made. It's not, you know, a lot of stuff you watch from then is quite stationary and fixed. So it's quite creative with it, but it just seems really dated. And the scene where he actually kills the bloke in the ghost train goes from being quite interesting, sort of visually interesting, to just him giving this ridiculous scream and then as if he's been pushed off of the train. But you've got to remember, you know, this is 47, 48, so it's a long time ago, and I'd imagine it was really gritty for that time. And some of the violence, there's another scene where they go around to get money off of this chap, and he's like swears he's being protected by the other gang. Dickie Attenborough as Pinky, the main guy's called Pinky, takes out this knife and like slashes the bloke's face, and there's no like sound effect, there's no dramatic sound effect or anything, but he walks back and he's got blood pouring out of his hand. And I'd imagine, you know, audiences in 1947 would probably like gasp to that. I think the best part of it was the woman Ida, who's sort of this bolshy woman who met the chap before he got murdered. She doesn't believe that he just killed himself, you know, which is the story that's going around. So she's trying to find out the truth. She played the character really well. She was quite loud and brash, and yeah, she actually come across as probably the most realistic character in there. Didn't seem quite so sort of hammy and stagey, you know, theatrical. But the girlfriend who Dickie Attenborough married, the little waitress Rose, she played it very sweet and innocent, and you just don't believe her character. You don't know where she's come from. She just goes on to become, I don't know how she got carried away. You don't believe that side of the story, and there's no sort of evidence about her past or anything, and you just think, well, why is she making all these decisions? Wouldn't she speak to I don't know. It just, yeah, it didn't seem very believable. And then she, record your voice for me, and he records his voice for her on this record player, but she hasn't got a record player to hear the record, and he's actually told her that he hates her, and all the time then you're thinking, oh, this record's going to come out, and she's going to find out that he's not as honest as she's making out. But then the record at the end, the girl plays it, and you think, she's finally going to hear it, because she won't accept that he's horrible. But where he's tried to destroy the record, it's scratched, so all she hears is him saying, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. I didn't expect that ending. I think that was the one bit where I was like, that happened, I didn't expect that. But I mean, sure, for its day it was probably a great film. I did notice also on Google that they remade it, so that might be worth having a look at. But as far as sort of videos that I haven't seen, I'll probably never watch it again. Okay, so that was episode 2. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please do follow us on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, and give us a rating. That'll always be good. It helps us independent podcasters get out there, doesn't it? The Films I Own That I Haven't Watched Yet podcast is a subsidiary of WN Movie Talk podcast, which is a podcast that I started with a friend and now I do with my brother, where in each episode we discuss a different movie in greater detail. That's a great podcast where me and my brother, and it used to be me and a friend, but yeah, WN Movie Talk podcast. The podcasts are a little bit longer and often quite hilarious, yet fact-filled. There's a stack of films over there that we discuss, and well worth a listen. Anyway, thank you ever so much for listening, and I will see you all again next week with another movie that I haven't watched yet. Cheers! family.